But the interesting question is, has that role changed, has it declined, or has the way that it's being carried out improved? And you know, there is a view around that there were in the past halcyon days, a time when students flocked to student unions, union general meetings were packed to the gunnels, and hundreds of thousands of students went on demonstrations. Well, I'm 48, I don't ever quite remember the 1960s, but looking back, I don't ever quite recall those halcyon days. In my experience, student leaders have always worried about levels of formal student participation in decision making. Union general meetings or SRCs have never been as packed as they should be, and turnout for executive elections has never got much above the figure of 10%. And even if there has been a decline in formal political activism, and I'm not sure there has, I don't think you should beat yourself up about it by believing that it's unique to student unions. When I was growing up, 80% of people voted in general elections. At the last general election, we were pleased when that figure crept back over 60%. Formal participation in all membership organisations throughout society has declined. Am I happy about those things? No, I'm not, but they're not unique to student unions. But I have to say there are some changes which do worry me. When I talk to student officers today sometimes, and forgive me for saying this, and I apologise if I offend anyone, I do sometimes worry that the motivation seems a desire to run a trading service empire rather than representing students and being political activists. Those changes are not unique to student unions, but I think it's something that is worth discussing. However, on the other side of the fence, in other ways, student unions, I think, have improved immeasurably in the way they involve students and train them to be leaders and activists. Training for student unions officers, in my experience, is immeasurably more professional than when I was elected as a president of a student union back in 1982. Corporate governance of student unions is much more seriously taken today than it ever was in the past. And when I was a student, a handful of students worked behind the union bar. Today, and I regard this as a positive good, most student unions employ hundreds of student staff and they train them, and that, I think, very much helps to develop those people as individuals and most certainly enhances their employability skills. So all of those, I think, are positive developments. Now, all the things I've been talking about, and which virtually all student unions organise, I think are important. They all make a difference to something that I and the government as a whole are increasingly concerned about, and that's the quality of the student experience. How much students actually get out of their higher education, not just as someone's future employees, but as human beings and citizens in society as well. And I want to conclude my talk this evening with some brief remarks on a very serious issue, one where I think student unions have an enormous contribution to make, not only to the well-being of students, but also the well-being of this country as a whole. And it draws together many of the things that I've been talking about this evening. Now, for me, one of the most beneficial things about being at university, being involved in your student union, is the ability to develop your own thinking, put forward your own views, have those challenged by others, and actually challenge the views of others. Academic freedom, the ability to debate and engage. But there is an issue around the tension between preserving and promoting free speech on campus and preventing the exploitation of young people by violent extremists. It's not a question on which I or the government always see eye to eye with the NUS. It's one that we talk to them about a lot. But there's no reason, I think, why we shouldn't discuss it here this evening. It is something where what I've said has had quite a lot of media coverage in recent months, and I think I can put the essence of my views on this, I hope, fairly simply. I very strongly believe that any university in which it's impossible to express minority views in public and in safety isn't, frankly, a university. It's Gormenghast. It's only by challenging what everybody currently thinks that knowledge and culture move forward. And it's only by ensuring that we all personally take responsibility for ensuring that others can express views with which we disagree, that we safeguard our own right to say what we fundamentally think and believe. Because there's nothing wrong with holding and expressing extreme or unpopular views within the law. And popularity changes from time to time. I've expressed some views that were deeply unpopular in the past. Fashions change. Students in particular have done that since the pacifist movements of the 30s, through the Aldermaston marches of the 50s, the Vietnam demonstrations of the 60s, the women's movement of the 70s, the Trident protests of the 80s, the environmental protests that we've seen in more recent years, and much else besides. In each of those instances, the people involved had a right to be heard, and so did those who held a different view. The right to express views entails the right for those who disagree to challenge them. It's also why I don't like to hear anyone howl down in the House of Commons, which actually happens much less often than you might think. I'm mindful, actually, that it happened to Winston Churchill twice in 1 year. On the first occasion, he was speaking against Britain allowing more self-rule for India, but on the second occasion, he was speaking against the then government's policy of appeasing the rise of Nazism in Germany. Students, in my view, should be radical. They should be activists, and they should be able to profess extreme views if that's what they believe and that's what they want to do. But, and this is the difficult bit, there is a limit to how far free expression of radical or extreme views can go. That's why, for example, incitement to racial hatred has been made illegal in this country. Civilised societies are built on tolerance of differing views, but they also, I think, very strongly depend on a set of core values shared by all civilised people. The values, if you want to put it like this, of a liberal democracy in the first quarter of the 21st century. Germany in the 1930s showed what happens when a people's determination to uphold those values breaks down. Not when it condones extremism, but when it condones extremism that crosses the line into violence, intimidation and terror. These are all things about which student unions need to think when they're providing premises for meetings or organising meetings of their own. It's also something they need to be aware of, I think, when planning their welfare policies. It's yet another good reason for them to forge links not just around campus, but with the wider community, including the faith communities of which all universities form part. There are forces in our society today, and they've said as much openly in the recent past, that are looking to exploit vulnerable young people at universities and at colleges, to persuade them to commit acts that run absolutely counter to what our shared values are, acts that would prejudice the well-being of our whole society, including communities from which such students come. I think it is the shared responsibility of everyone involved in university life, including student unions, to help prevent them doing that and to protect those who might potentially be vulnerable to them. In that regard, a couple of weeks ago, I issued on behalf of the government guidance to universities on preserving academic freedom and combating violent extremism on campus. The guidance was drawn up with the close involvement of many partners, including groups that represent Muslim students. It doesn't ask anyone to spy on anyone else. Its aim is simply to give practical advice on how to preserve universities as bastions of free speech, the rule of law, and the liberty to profess any faith or none in increasingly dangerous times, and to protect students from intimidation. And I hope that student unions will engage in the debate about academic freedom and respond to that guidance. If I can, in conclusion, we've covered tonight, I hope, a lot of territory in quite a short time. I've certainly, in thinking about what I was going to say this evening, enjoyed revisiting my own past in the student union movement, catching up with some of the things that the student union movement is doing today, and thinking about some of the things that it could be doing tomorrow. Earlier on, I quoted Henry Kissinger's rather jaundiced take on university politics. But before I take your questions, I'd like to end up with a more uplifting thought, and it's from the great philosopher Sir Cecil Beaton. For me, on the basis of my own experience, it sums up what student politics, the NUS and student politics in general, is actually about. It ought to sum up, in my view, what our entire higher education system is about, and I sincerely hope that it's what each and every one of you is about. Beaton wrote, "Be daring, be different, be impractical, be anything that will assert the integrity of purpose and imaginative vision against the play it safer, the creatures of the commonplace, the slaves of the ordinary." If you can't do that in your own student union when you're at university, then I do not know when you will be able to do it. Student unions, very strongly in my view, are a force for good. They do develop activists and leaders, and long may that be the case. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry I kept you waiting, and let's have a conversation. Thank you.